Hello, hello, everyone. We'll give just a couple minutes for people to enter the stream. But in the meantime, if you would like to enter in the chat where you're tuning in from, we'd love to see. We typically have a pretty global audience, which obviously we love. Louisiana, nice. And I'm tuning in from Los Angeles, California, which, Elisha, I believe you're tuning in from the same.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Welcome from Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Chi-town, nice. California. Hello, everyone. In London, nice. San Jose, Scotland. It's just so nice to see that there's a global audience all together here.
Mm-hmm.
And since it's a couple minutes after the hour, I'll go ahead and introduce the host of this panel, who is to my left on my screen, Elisha Goldstein. He is one of the world's preeminent mindfulness teachers, a clinical psychologist, author of numerous best-selling books, creator of the popular YouTube channel, Making Practical Mental Health Videos to educate and inspire people, and at the forefront of the conversation between AI and mental health. He is also the creator of the Breakthrough Mental Health Accelerator program, which is called Uncover the Power Within. For the past 20 years as a psychologist and a mindfulness educator, he has been at the forefront of integrating curriculum and training for therapists, educators, business professionals, active military, parents, and others in the art and science of mindful living. His books include Uncovering Happiness, The Now Effect, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Workbook, and MBSR Every Day. In an increasingly fragmented society, he is working to bring people together so they may motivate and inspire one another in far-reaching ways. All right, I'll hand it over to you, Elisha.
Yay. Thank you, Christine. Really appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here with all of you, and for all of you who are tuning in live, and if you're listening to the recording, this is, to me, one of the most important conversations we can have right now. And I'm really thrilled to have an excellent panel of speakers. I'm really looking forward to us diving in and going deep. And so I want to give us a little bit of a lay of the land as to what we're going to be talking about here, just to lay the foundation, what we're going to be talking about here. I'm going to introduce all the panelists, and we're going to dive deep into this. Right now, you may be tuning in and have some idea of what's happening in our field right now, or you might be just new to it. The advances of AI in the field of our culture right now are happening at a lightning speed. And just to give you an idea, last February, Snapchat, which a huge majority of teens are using, has over 150 million teens on there right now, launched something called My AI, which was their companion app / kind of therapeutic modality support. Over 10 billion messages have been sent over My AI at this point. Millions more are engaging different AI companion apps right now. It's a new type of relationship that's entering into our culture. Some people go as far as saying we're training with OpenAI and other things a new species of intelligence. And so the question that's coming to this panel right now is, as this is unfolding, is what do we need to understand about what's happening in the field of AI and companionship and mental health, and really specifically concerning mental health for us and really for the next generation. Well, I'll introduce Jim Doty, Dr. Jim Doty here in a moment. He's created an app, or creating an app right now, called Happy.ai that's working with anxiety and depression. There's other companies right now like Wobot and Cassie AI and Replica and Wysa, who, when you come onto these apps right now, are also saying, some of them are saying, like, do you want this for companionship? Do you want this for as a therapist right now? And there's a lot of controversy around this to some degree in people, because we don't know, we don't have the information, and so we're looking towards it right now. For example, just last night, we're announcing this to like some people in my circle of friends, and one mom comes on and says, like, wow, this is so great. This is gonna be so great for the kids. Can you imagine if something was like with them 24 hours. It can support them when they're feeling symptoms of anxiety or depression or something like that. While another person on LinkedIn who I engaged with said, I want nothing to do with any of this. This is like artificial intimacy and that kind of. So we're all learning and we're coming into our own with this right now. One thing we do know is that this is coming, and we're going to be coexisting with this. And we're also in the midst and continue to be of a growing mental health crisis, specifically for our teens, but also for adults. And we have to be aware of things like, how is this built? What's the biases that are built into it? And what's the data privacy of this incredibly private information that's going to be conversations that are going to be happening, through this? And can this actually mirror true empathy, which we know is the cornerstone, empathy and compassion, which is the cornerstone of a therapeutic relationship. Okay, so enough of that. And that was just the introduction. I want to introduce our incredible panelists right now. Let's bring them on if we can. And so I'm going to add to the stream here. Here you see Dr. James Doty. He's a clinical professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at Stanford University School of Medicine and the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University, where he researches the neuroscience of compassion and altruism. He's a New York Times bestselling author of the memoir Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart, now translated in 31 languages. He's also the editor of the Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science, and I think he has another book coming out called Mind Magic as well. I also want to introduce Randima Fernando, also goes by Randy. He's the co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, which has helped over 100 million people globally understand the harms of extractive technology. He'll define for you, help you understand what that term actually means and how we can do better through the social dilemma and other projects. You may have seen that documentary on Netflix. Randy previously served for 7 years as founding executive director at Mindful Schools, a nonprofit that has taught mindfulness to millions of kids worldwide. Before that, Randy led award-winning projects and authored 3 #1 ranked 3D graphic books over 7 years of NVIDIA. He also serves on the board of Spirit Rock Meditation Center. I also want to introduce you to Milagros Escoredo. She has a master's degree in psychology and a background in artificial intelligence and mental health. As a conversational AI specialist, she spearheaded the AI mental health chatbots, driving content development and research publications. She was formerly at Google, and Milagros is dedicated to leveraging technology for meaningful social impact initiatives. And finally, I want to introduce you to Immanual Joseph. He's a high school biology teacher. So for those of you who have teens and kids, this is going to be very important because this is the world they're growing up in right now. We're all growing up in this world right now, but we really want to look at this next generation. And he's the author of 8 books, 3-time TEDx speaker, former cancer drug discovery scientist, certified life coach, and compassion activist. Immanuel has a PhD in biochemistry from Tulane University, New Orleans. He taught compassion skills at organizations including Facebook, Amazon, Salesforce, HSBC, and he lives in McKinney, Texas. Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you so much to all of you, the speakers here who are here right now. I want to ask everyone just to kind of see who here and those of you who are listening right now, you're welcome to say yes or no to this too, has engaged with a AI companion or therapeutic support, could just be AI companion of any kind, and had kind of a fun or informative type of experience with that. I'm just curious. Yeah. So, this is something we're all sort of onboarding with right now. This has been out for a little while. So I want to get a little background here, just so everyone's on the same page. So AI isn't new, just for everyone, even though we've kind of like OpenAI came out, there's big, lots of fanfare around it. And, but it's not really new. It's been around for a while. It's been running our search engines, our spam filters, our social media. Every time you do online shopping, anyone that engages with Siri, Alexa, Google, your music streaming, your website chatbots, those things. But I want to get a sense from you here, like even though it's not been around for a while, what's really changed recently, and why are we starting to pay so much attention to it right now? Go ahead, Jim.
Oh no, I think in some ways it's come out of the shadows. Traditionally, it's been a very techie sort of algorithm, and now it is sort of now mainstream, and we're seeing all sorts of things happen. And we've seen this with some other technologies where there's this incredible hype about the possibilities, and then as more knowledge is gained, and as we see what can and cannot be done, then we get a more realistic view of the possibilities for that technology. Of course, sadly, what invariably happens in a capitalist society is there's a large number of people who then try to figure out how to extract as much money from whatever that technology is. And I think we're seeing that now where essentially every company is advertising or promoting some sort of quote AI technology that is exclusive to their platform. And the reality is that many of these are using AI at its most superficial level. I think the other challenge that we're seeing is how this technology is actually limited. We're starting to see inaccurate information. As an example, I asked it to do a bio of me, and it created 5 wonderful awards that don't exist. Now, of course, I put that on my CV anyway, but but it also, of course, hallucinates and creates all sorts of bad things. And if you're not diligent, you may fall into the trap. And of course, we've seen the examples of how this has also resulted in actually people getting worse. I mean, I think there was a well-known case of an individual who was discussing their mental health, and the AI suggested that they kill themselves. And I think they may have actually. So
Yes.
there are many, many dangers here, and I think we have to be very, very aware of that.
Okay.
I'd add,
Go ahead.
yeah. I'd add just a few things. So, on top of all, I think I agree with everything Jim said. This generation of AI is a lot more capable, and that's a combination of, there was a big breakthrough in 2017, a change in the model architecture that allowed it to map to matrices. And it turns out graphics processing hardware is very good at dealing with matrices. And so that led to like a complete change in the slope, the trajectory of improvement. And now we have much larger models, large data sets, and much better results as a consequence of that. So you can see, right, all these improvements in generative AI, so generating text, images, audio, video, but also forms of reasoning, problem solving. These very large models have these kind of emergent capabilities. They do hallucinate. So there are these trade-offs, and especially when they're very good at some things, it becomes very hard to distinguish between when you should trust them and when you shouldn't. And that's part of the problem. When they're performing at 90th percentile on the bar exam and 99th percentile on the GRE verbal, getting a 5 on the AP psychology test, then you start to have this problem. And as Jim said, right, when certain things like writing bios, it's terrible at doing that because it will hallucinate very happily things that seem like you should have, right, awards that it seems like you should have. But that's kind of the summary of, I think, where we are.
Just to get clear on that, Randy, because I know you and Jim both use that term, just so everyone, there may be many people here who are familiar with that term, hallucinate, and some people who are tuning in, like, what is this thing, that's happening right now? Can you define that a little bit more?
Yeah, hallucinations are what happen when the AI. So it's just trying to complete sentences, right? It goes token by token. So part of a word by part of a word, it just kind of constructs the sentence. Now, it uses a very complex process for doing that, factoring in the meanings of words, the positions of words in sentences. It tries to figure out which words are more important in a sentence. So it does a lot of things. And these large models also have an understanding of the, let's say, the different hierarchy of a sentence paragraphs, stories. It's quite complicated how it's able to factor all that in. But as it goes through that process, it's just completing things based on its training. And sometimes the training doesn't take it to the right places. And so you get these hallucinations, and it gets worse and worse once you get the model off track. It starts to do worse and worse because there's many reasons, but one of the reasons, maybe the most predominant one, is that it's quite loyal to what it's already said. So it tries to, because it weighs all of those previous tokens quite a lot. And so when it tries to predict future tokens, once it goes off the rails, the tendency to make more future wrong predictions is much higher. And so what happened in the New York Times exchange, right, that reporter deliberately tried to take it off the rails, got it off the rails. And once you're in that realm, you can get a lot of bad things happening. And that's, of course, very dangerous when you start to use chatbots for advice, therapeutic advice, or medical advice, or legal advice. Very different from writing poems or writing stories, fictional stories, where the margin of error doesn't really matter. When it hallucinates a bit, you might even get a better result.
Okay. So we can see how, when we'll talk about this in a little bit, I'll ask this question about like what kind of guardrails we really need around this. Because it's one thing to talk to ChatGPT about something. It might be another thing to talk to a bot that's been created by a therapeutic company that's put certain kind of rails in place for it. And we'll kind of see. I have a question just to kind of, and we'll get more to the concerns in a minute as well. But as AI evolves, we know people are developing relationships with in a therapeutic way. As I was saying before, you can go on apps right now and it says, do you want to use this for a companion? Do you want to use this as a romance partner? Do you want to use this as a therapeutic bot? It's like, oh, I can use it for anything, even more intimate relationships. But how do we know? I'm curious, how is AI being used right now, or have you seen being AI used right now in the areas of well-being? Let's say even for the relief of anxiety and depression. I know, Milagros, you have experience with this. So if you could speak to that.
Yes, of course. AI can be leveraged in a way that it can like support people emotionally. I had the opportunity to work during 4 years with an AI mental health startup, and we were able to prove scientific in a research that we got IRB approval that if you chatted during 2 minutes a day during 8 weeks, you were going to be able to reduce symptoms of anxiety by 18% and depression by 13%, which is a lot. And it can help to provide access to certain treatments to people that do not have access. I have 8 years of clinical psychotherapies in vulnerable social situations and working with really complex patients that didn't have like any type of access to mental health. And this can actually provide a lot of help. But with that being said, like if someone needs to seek for a therapist, will need to see it. It's not going to replace a psychologist. It's not going to replace a treatment, but it can be a really good and potential. It has a lot of potential as a tool to support the therapist and to support the person that is going through a really hard situation. A therapist can only see you maybe once a week for an hour, and the rest of the week or the rest of the days you might feel lonely or you might need more support, and the AI can be there to provide that kind of support, but we would never be able to replace it. One of the things that I saw that that stood a lot for me were seeing a lot of women telling for the first time to the AI that they've been sexually abused, and they were not able to tell that to anyone else. And the reason why they were talking to the chatbot is because they felt that they had a support 24/7 and there was free stigmatization. So in that case, it can really help, or it can really start as an initial support to that person. And of course, these women that suffer for sexual abuse, they will need afterwards to seek to a professional. Same with suicidal. So it can be there for a person who has maybe high risk for suicide, and that means that the person already have the means, already know, like have the day that it's going to get suicide, and already took that decision, and maybe in that moment a therapist cannot be available for that person, for that patient, and maybe the AI can be there for that person in that moment. But afterwards, of course, we need to seek for a professional. So I agree what we said, what they said at the beginning, that we need to have a lot of boundaries and a lot of control and ethical and transparency on how we're going to use the AI. But it has a tremendous potential to support in mental health.
So if I can add to this, since we're talking about connection, I was thinking, I remember the first time I held my baby in my arms, the first time I kissed my wife, the first time I held a puppy in my arms. There was a certain joy, a certain connection I felt. I'm using the bots, the chat bots now, and the images that come with them. I really don't feel that connection. So in a way, I feel we are we are trading quality for quantity. I think we are able to make a lot more connections, but there is a certain depth that we are compromising, at least at the way that AI is currently placed. Because I think I will always know when I'm interacting with a bot that it is essentially a bunch of linear algebra and calculus and statistics and so on, right? So I think that reality check, at least from the generation that we come from, is always going to be there in the back of my mind. So I don't think AI can completely trade for human connection or replace it.
It's interesting you say that. It's been said somewhere that 93% of the way we communicate is nonverbal.
Yeah.
So and we know that AI is headed towards a form of just like really high intelligence. And we talked about that here, but the question that this begs a little bit, Immanuel, is can it replace human empathy, or does it need to? Like, how good will it get at looking at human empathy? I know some people who are making advances in the field of machine learning right now have been mapping human faces and studying micro expressions on emotions using AI, and can now map to 50 emotional states on a human face. So it's a learning from us, but can it, I guess this is the question I'm going to put back to all of you. How do we, if it can it replace human empathy? Can it mirror human empathy? And so what do you think about that?
In my opinion, it can mimic human empathy. It can amplify compassion or empathy, but it would never replace it. I agree with Immanuel. Like I am a mother, and the experience of me holding my son in my belly and then giving birth, that is a completely human experience that an AI or a technology will never do it. But it can definitely amplify or maybe mirror or mimic some of the compassion. That's kind of my stand.
Beautifully said. And just to add to that, Milagros, I mean, just by the definition of compassion, if you take Dr. Dutton and Dr. Wardlin's definition of compassion, right, it is a four-step process. It is noticing suffering, it's feeling for the sufferer, it is suspending judgment, and then stepping into action to relieve that suffering. AI can do the first and the last parts. I'm sure it can notice suffering better than most people can because of all the algorithms that go into it, and it can suggest solutions very quickly, not even though not physically step into it. But does it really feel the suffering? Does it bring its own biases into that and judgments into that alleviation of suffering? So these are the things that that's the big gap. So if it is just the end to the means, then yes, we can have AI suggesting solutions. But is that truly compassion when it is not following through the process of feeling, the empathy that's part of it? That's the question I'm challenged with.
And there's a related tricky question, which is how much does that matter versus like helping the person who's there? And then there's a whole sequence of other problems where the person might get more dependent on the artificial avatar, so that, it's even though the avatar is actually helping them to make maybe wiser decisions, more access, right? And there's a huge inequity gap there, right? That it starts to help to bridge, because mental health is such a massive problem, but very few people have access. And as Milagros said, right, the examples of how little access people get, and even how much you can get, how much benefit you can get, even with, you were saying 2 minutes, right? Just like there's such a notable increase from zero to something, and then from something to multiple times a day as you need it. I mean, wow, right? That's really interesting. So, but of course, it opens the door to a whole different set of problems that I think we should definitely discuss. And then when it starts tying into kids, you have another set of complexities.
So, just a comment. Milagros indicated that, of course, it's beneficial to a subset of people, but quote unquote, they should see a therapist. Well, as everyone has pointed out, there's a mental health crisis, and frankly, the majority of the population do not have access to a therapist. So, where does that leave us? The other interesting thing is you mentioned, Elijah, about the ability to track facial expressions. The challenge with that is, though, depending on how you're using it, if you're, let's say, trying to use a app on your phone, you don't always keep your phone right here, and you actually need that. You mentioned the company I started called Happy.ai, and that's HAPPI.ai. So there are a couple issues here. One is I would suggest to you that most of the apps that say that they track facial expressions were never meant to be used in this case scenario. What I mean by that is billions of dollars have been spent on creating these types of things to monitor employees, to monitor people in the service industry who are using the phone. They are not meant for mental health. And the reason is because you have to actually track their facial expressions. And if you're going like this, you can't do that. We looked at 27 different companies that use both facial expression, that use voice analysis, that converted text into context, or speech, I should say, into text, into context, to give a much more robust way in which to assess emotional state. So those are really critical, and I would suggest to you that chatbots do not do that. A chatbot has absolutely zero ability to understand your emotional state. As an example, I mean, how do you say, I'm sad versus I'm really sad? You don't have that ability, so it's making assessments. Now, this is not to say they're bad in any way. I'm just saying they're certainly not ideal. And the reason I bring that up is what we have done is, one, we've developed an emotion engine that actually, with better accuracy than the commercially available products, because it was very specifically designed for this use case, it actually is pretty good at assessing your emotional state. Two, we talked about the issue related to hallucination. Well, if you have OpenAI and you're using that as your data acquirer, if you will, or data information source, you are going to have problems. That's why what we've done is we've created a middleware, if you will, that actually is a proprietary conversational AI that has been imbued with psychology and compassion-focused therapy. So it doesn't go off the rails. It cannot go off the rails. And three, the other thing that I think is probably the most interesting is we utilize an avatar, which you do not have the problem with the uncanny valley, where you're looking at it and you know it's not real. Now, that's not to say we certainly do not promote it as real in any way. In fact, the chatbot, I should say the avatar, will simply say, I am a avatar, I have been programmed X, Y, and Z. But the point is that when you talk about human connection, and this is really, I think, the key here, seeing an entity or a presence that is non-judgmental, that is empathic, that is compassionate, and that, quote unquote, listens, this does mimic the interactions that humans have. And whether we like it or not, and even if we know it, you will still respond appropriately as you would with a human. Now, I'm not promoting this as replacement for therapy. What I am promoting is the ability to have a conversation with somebody in an empathic manner. And I would suggest to you early on with somebody with stress and anxiety, if you can have a simple conversation with, quote unquote, a human-like avatar, it will dissipate the vast majority of symptoms you're having. And we've studied this, actually.
Yeah, I think this is an overlap of the studies that you found those outcomes. Milagros found those outcomes around reduction in symptoms of anxiety and depression. It's interesting. A study came out a few years ago out of USC, University of Southern California, with patients with PTSD, that where they randomly assigned them to seeing a human therapist and seeing a digital avatar. And what they found was that that patients who were seeing the digital avatar were more likely to be forthcoming with information. And so here's this perception of a non-judgmental presence, which is what a therapist is supposed to come with anyway. Someone who's available, as you said, Jim, and some of you have said here, available all the time, kind, patient, compassionate, in this way. And so the person feels like, okay, being forthcoming. And I've seen other versions of that. That are there in the past. So there is something about, we want to be careful when we're couching this conversation around like AI versus a therapist or AI versus humans. Likely what's going to happen, I imagine, is going to be an integration. That's why I said we're sort of coexisting with a sort of new species we're training right now. And the way of working together, we're training it. And so, or maybe it's kind of training itself. That's a different conversation that could be happening. But this kind of like, how do we kind of coexist in a way that's going to advance the best aspects of support? I want to play something for everyone here, just so you can see where this is, because not everyone here kind of sees where this is like rudimentary. Where we are right now, we can imagine in kind of a caveman period, cavewoman period, and where we're going to be next year is going to be very different, and then a year after that. So here, I'm going to add this. This was by the Wall Street Journal.
Looks and moves like me. We begin by smiling into the camera. I love to smile. Smiling's my favorite. I'm breathing gently for a short second. Is this what breathing looks like? I'm Joanna Stern, and I'm excited to host this video.
No, I am the real Joanna.
So we can see how, we know there's stuff that's come out with Google and other things where you can record your audio for 3 seconds and boom, we've seen it trick chase card systems and some other things like that too. Like I've seen examples of that. So, but now we're integrating kind of video. So you imagine like here you have your, the person that you're seeing that's supporting you, and they can create something of themselves to be with you more regularly through the week that can then just tell you like, hey, you're feeling a little, your biomarkers are a little elevated right now. Notice you're feeling a little anxiety. Here's some ideas that might support you right now. This type of thing, which is also sort of available with some smart devices at the moment. And that's why AI is kind of built in. So as we kind of look towards this, some of the things that I'm interested in is a little bit what Jim's talking about. I know Randy has a lot of, and all of you have experience with this, is when we're talking about these guardrails, it's different if you're asking ChatGPT something or Google Bard something, but if you're actually creating this therapeutic support, what are the guardrails that we need to put in place right now that are going to actually make it more specific and not kind of do those things that we've seen the studies where it's giving all kinds of inappropriate responses that are enhancing eating disorder issues or enhancing OCD, because it's telling them to check with their friends if they're feeling uncomfortable. So you're checking. That's the problem with OCD. That's some of the stuff that's been given out. But what are some of these guardrails that are there when we're training this? What are we seeing out there?
I think a very important thing is unconscious bias. I think that if we are building something from scratch, doing it from scratch, we need to make sure that we're making accessible for everyone and work with very diverse data collection where we are sure that we're not creating any more bias, because that could be something very harmful for anyone that is using it. Same with ethics. We need to have a lot of ethics considerations while we are building it, and also, in my opinion, research. We need to do a lot of scientific research in order to understand if what we're doing is doing or not more harm, which is one of the things that I'm mostly concerned that now that we have available all these huge models, people are leveraging everywhere and saying like, oh, I'm building this AI, this companion, because it's going to be really good in the market, but they are not doing enough research, scientific research, and if this is making or not more harm into the people that are actually using it. But unconscious bias is also, it's again, it's very important to have it into consideration.
I think there's a few things here. We always look at what are the dominant forces that drive the system. And of course, here it's like the incentive structure, right? Price is what everything revolves around. So you have to figure out interventions that connect back to price if you really want to affect the system, like in a meaningful, like in a material way beyond just words or, people making nice statements. So you have to find ways to put liability back on company balance sheets. And in this case, because these technologies are being released before we understand them well, only because our regulations aren't able to keep up with the pace of technological evolution, we have to find ways to incur liability for future harms, right? There has to be a way of saying, you ran ahead, you didn't do the adequate precautionary work, and now you've caused harm. And there is a cost of that. You ran ahead, you benefited, and now you did harm, and we are going to bring that back on your balance sheet. I think that's really important. The principle of binding power with responsibility is very important, because the typical, the tech playbook is, hey, we invented something great, really powerful. We released it for everyone. Oh my God, there's problems. Let's talk about the problems. Oh, we want regulation. We should definitely have regulation to make sure no one can produce those problems. You guys tell us what the regulations are. And then it turns out it's impossible to regulate right at that stage. And this is kind of the pattern that we keep following. We followed it with social media, where it's definitely happening with AI. And you need to find ways to bind those things. And the last thing I'll say is fiduciary responsibility, right? Similar to therapists or doctors, you need to have AI therapists, right, to have those same kinds of acting in service of the client.
Yeah, you're talking about how companies have been shown who are building this right now, the humans are building it. And so what we've seen is some documented racial bias, elderly discrimination. That's been, that's in there because it doesn't have, you're training it on these, let's say, white men or something like that. There's this natural discrimination. So, this kind of goes to, how can we prevent certain populations from being discriminated against or marginalized by, this happening right now. I think that's kind of what you're a little bit were speaking to, Randy. And
it's a lot broader than that, though. It's a lot broader than that. And I think that there's an easy narrative there, but actually the companies are doing I think quite a bit better on that axis, and they're not so naive about their training data now. I think that there's still obviously tons of documented harms, right, that we point to all the time too. But it's not as simplistic as it was. It was really, really much worse, right, 10 years ago. That will continue, right, to be the case. But also, there's this challenge where all humans are biased too, right? They're biased because we're conditioned beings, right? So AIs are conditioned, humans are conditioned, and it's just a question of how badly distorted is the conditioning and how much weight are we putting on it? That's the problem, right? With the AI models, because they're so good, again, at so many things, we start to look at their training as the golden set of conditions versus some other humans training as oh, it's just a human. But actually they're all conditioned, right? So you have to look at how quote fair or representative is that conditioning. So yeah, it's a complex topic, but just
I would just make a few comments here. I'm sorry, Immanuel, do you want to?
No, go ahead.
So I think there's several issues. One issue relates to the extractive nature of capitalism. And if you look at some of these companies, as an example, Replica, it now you can choose for it to be a companion or have a more personal relationship. Well, why would you do that? And the reason is because, as we all know, or unfortunately know, is that pornography is highly profitable. So they want to create a relationship and utilize whatever drops of dopamine are necessary to get you addicted to that relationship. And there is not a sense that there is some responsibility to you. They're trying to get you to use their app. And I think it's really, really critical that the type of companies who are promoting either mental health support or therapists really take that into mind as to their responsibilities. But the reality is, if you follow that track, your company's not going to be as profitable. Now, certainly from my perspective, I don't care. I could care if we can offer something that improves someone's life and it makes a little bit of money, or in fact even no money. It's irrelevant if we can supply something that benefits people. But that is certainly not the ethos of Silicon Valley in any way, shape, or form. The other aspect is that we have to have in these apps an escalation policy, if you will, or I should say a de-escalation. Because again, especially for someone who doesn't have the resources, there has to be an ability to recognize potential self-harm and respond to that in the most appropriate way. The challenge is, as an example, if somebody is stating they're going to kill themselves, do you simply say, please call 911? And because, if you called your therapist at midnight and were thinking of self-harm, sadly what you get is a thing that says, if this is a life-threatening emergency, please call 911, which isn't exactly compassionate nor empathetic, but it covers their ass in terms of the legal manifestations of it. So I think we have to be very, very thoughtful about what our responsibility is, and also recognize that it is an imperfect system, because here we have a huge swath of the population who have no mental health resources whatsoever, yet we're talking about all these little things to help them, yet what they really need is access to mental health resources. And it's, I think, a very significant challenge. But this goes on to, unfortunately, the extractive nature of capitalism in general, whether it's resulting in people living in poverty or not having health care, or a whole variety of other situations that exacerbate one's mental health.
So I want to quickly add to that original question from Elisha about guardrails, right? And I think there are two kinds of guardrails. One, we are thinking about the guardrails that we can put in as systems, government regulations, making a choice as to what kind of databases should AI access, and so on. So all of these are one kind of guardrail in the system guardrail. But I'm also thinking about how do we equip our children and we as users to handle AI responsibility. I mean, if I'm sending my kid into the boxing ring without training, then they are going to face 1,000 Mike Tysons, right? But what if I train them? What if I tell them that behind the AI that I see, there is a company that wants my money, that wants my time, that wants my attention? And so to go in with that level of awareness, I think this is something that comes from education. We prioritize so many things in education, right? We teach them to acquire knowledge. Now knowledge is going to become secondary with ChatGPT and all the other things that are available. So I think the guardrail that we need there is for us to teach our children the ability to step back into themselves, find their own connection to others, to be able to find joy in silence, to reduce to make decisions about screen time and so on. So I think that's kind of the second guardrail, an inner guardrail that we need to educate our children and us about.
Yeah. That reminds me a lot of the work that Randy and the Center for Humane Technology has done around the social dilemma and everything. And it's just, that wisdom maintains. And it's been so challenging for parents. Speaking about parents, Immanuel, it's been so challenging, especially since COVID. There's been like a really gone off the rails versus guardrails as far as like engagement with that, right? And so it's challenging. So this will be continuing education. That's why the Center for Humane Technology is so important to tune in. If you all haven't tuned into that organization, to really tune into that organization, to get kind of support really around that, to get insight ideas, joining community. There's there's whole movements by leading people of like, that support parents around, being strong enough in some ways to unfold technology in certain segments of the kid's life. But we're all doing the best we can. With that said, let me ask a question. So I was listening to the relationship expert, some of you familiar with her, Esther Perel, a little bit ago, and she was giving a talk around AI actually, and she was saying like, well, AI, really stands for artificial intimacy. So here you have Jim, you talking about the reality around so many apps right now that are, by the way, to speak to Immanuel's point, that our kids and teens will, if you don't already have parental controls, set, will be kind of like downloading these apps. And, we are in many people have said we're in a loneliness epidemic. This has been since Mother Teresa has said this is the biggest epidemic. It's continued to unfold, our Surgeon General. And so the question is like, if there's loneliness, to what extent does the perceived connection with an AI companion or therapist, this relationship that we're developing right now that's unfolding quickly, create a sense of connection for somebody? And to what extent does it create artificial intimacy that could actually exacerbate a feeling of loneliness ultimately? And I think that's an interesting place to drop that.
Well, I mean, this is like the situation. I have 5,000 Facebook friends, and yet you have no friends, right? I mean, this is the challenge, but this is not to negate the reality that there are a lot of lonely people. And so then the challenge is, how do you create a situation that is supportive, yet does not create that artificial intimacy? But unfortunately, I think it is going to happen. If you look at adolescents today, many of them are very connected to these games where they're avatars, where they interact, they feel comfortable with it. And the other side of the coin, which is on some levels is even sadder, you look as an example, and I'm not picking this country just to pick that country because it's everywhere. But you look in China where there was infanticide of female children, and so you have this disproportion between males and females. So you have all these lonely men, and either they're getting involved with pornography, or they're getting involved with sex dolls, or all these other aberrations, or what some people would consider aberrations in terms of normal behavior. You also have a situation in Japan, and I can't remember the name of it, where teenagers are self-isolating because they don't want to go out and interact in the world. So there are all these issues that are floating around, and that unfortunately technology can certainly exacerbate. So I don't know what's worse. I mean, if you can have a person interact with a entity or presence that makes him feel comfortable, and while doing so says, it would be great if you go out, or, we've created this group of people who would love to chat with you, actual people, and you're creating sort of a community with sort of AI and the interaction in the center of it. I think that is as healthy as you're probably going to get. But it is a very big challenge right now, and especially, in elderly people, and this idea of loneliness. If you look at what happened in Japan, of course, we had these robots, or these small little robots that interact with seniors too, and a lot of them are quite happy with it. So the question is, having a conversation with your robot or whatever, who knows you, who's interacted with you for some time, who asks you questions, asks you about your hobbies, makes you feel comfortable, versus zero interaction with another human being, which is worse?
Well, there is something there. I mean, it's interesting about the ability to deal. So I go back to like the Buddhist training, right? When I want to answer these kinds of questions, I always go back to like my 101, operating system. But without getting too far into that, I think everyone should just ask in whatever their framework is. It's sort of like, it's the thriving question. Like, what does thriving mean, and why do you do the things you do? what makes a decision wise or a relationship wise. And I think one of the big challenges here is that these avatars, because of they're well suited to be therapists, for example, like let's say light to medium weight therapists, they're very well suited for that because of all these qualities, right? Like patience, and they can do pseudo empathy very well. But they also never piss you off, right? So that does not train you well for the rest of life when you go away from that experience. So that's a clue, right? The fact that if you're not equanimous, if you're not resilient, okay, so now there's a problem. And so that would answer the question for me in saying over-indexing on that, if it makes you very weak, like deficient in these other areas, then there's a problem with the dosage. And with all these things, almost every time, right, every tech company produces a product that's good at some dose, and then they vastly exceed that dose, and then they tie it to extractive capitalism, and then you get a mess. This is our pattern. And so we have to just see that. But I think there's tests like that that reveal why, they answer the question, like why too much of even a great avatar is a problem. And one last thing I'll say is, for kids, one of my big worries is that there will be quite decent avatars that are, you go back to the social platform to access. And of course, now the companies are going to have a competition, right, on who can produce the best virtual avatar, best AI. They're not all competing there right now because they see the liability is large. And they saw how badly Snapchat screwed that up. And so they're not all jumping in, but they are going to be ready to do that. Also, we just had Esther Perel on our podcast, like this week's episode. So I think that's a really good one to check out. It's exactly on this topic, is artificial intelligence and relationships.
And also, sorry, go ahead, Milagros.
Are you sure? No,
Yeah, go ahead, Milagros.
The only thing I think that what James and Ramdi, I agree with everything that they just said. I just want to add that at the end we need to understand that we are putting an input and we're getting an output. That's what it is at the end of the technology. We're putting something there and we're getting out of something out of there. And I think that creating transparency is very important. Like the transparency, just saying like this is an AI. This is not going to replace a human. And also making sure that whoever is building that model needs to encourage, as James said, like build a community, go out there, try to put a smile. It is, I think, very hard to be with ourselves, right? Like it's a journey to be with ourselves, to learn about ourselves, to learn who we are, to look ourselves in the mirror and like, and just be human, right? Like that's a lot, and go out there and be with another human that can generate, that can reject us, that can make us feel uncomfortable, that it's not going to make us happy. As Randy said, like the AI is always going to make us happy at the end of the day. It's a customer service, you know. Like we're going to be happy after we talk there. I don't want to use the word happy, but kind of like we're going to be okay, because that's what it's trying to make us feel, like that that everything is fine, and it's not creating us to the real world where we're gonna feel uncomfortable, where we're gonna have all these maybe uncomfortable emotions that we don't understand how to process them, so we end up like getting into there. But on the other side, as we said, we're in a mental health crisis. 1 out of 8 people are going to have or experience an issue in mental health, according to the World Health Organization. So having a tool, but again, a tool out there that can at some point provide certain support or certain help on demand 24/7 can also be really helpful. But we cannot forget that it's a tool, and it's, you put an input, you get an output. That's it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Immanuel, and then I'll say something.
Okay. So I was just going to say, I completely echo what Milagros says about, the human nature. I believe what makes a relationship joyful in some sense is the imperfection that comes with the humans that we work with. And if you work with perfect humans, it's always going to put me on the edge. The imperfections, the unpredictability of human nature, and also the joy of pursuing a relationship. When it comes too easy, then I'm not going to enjoy it as much, but I woo the person and I woo the relationship. I think we lose that joy when my replica is available there anytime and doing anything for me, right? But then at the end of the day, I know that it's not real. It's just trying to please me, as Randy said. What's the joy there? Where's my dopamine kicking in?
Well, I would suggest that, at least in what we're attempting to develop, we're not here to make you happy or agree with you. We're here to act like somebody you're talking to. And if you say something inappropriate, not thoughtful, degrading, etc., you should be called on it. It's not. We're not here to say, "Oh, you want to kill somebody? Hey, go out and do it, man. We're all for you." The whole point here is actually to be a support system that gives people a realistic view of their thought processes, and then offers them the ability through conversation to alter them, or through different techniques to gain insight and self-awareness. It is not to just agree with them and make them feel better, because that's not how life works, as Randy was saying. All of us have parts of our lives that suck, frankly, and you just have to live with it and develop the tools necessary. And this is where realistic conversation, whether it's with a human or a AI, can be very helpful to people. But it has to obviously be programmed appropriately, and you mentioned Milagros ethics. You have to sit there and say, what am I here for? Am I here to maximize the amount of this person spends with me? Or am I here to offer helpful suggestions that will improve this patient's lives? And this is the challenge, especially in a lot of private entities, because unfortunately so many of them are focused on maximization of profit versus being thoughtful and saying, what is it I can do to be the most helpful in this situation? And this is really a big challenge. And frankly, I think most companies are not in that mindset. Now, that being said, I presently don't have a ton of VCs breathing down my neck demanding a 10x return. But from my prior experience interacting in those environments, I don't care.
Well, this is why the incentive structure thing is so important, right? If you want to know how something's going to behave or someone's going to behave, look at the incentive structures, because unfortunately in real life, they almost always take over the ethical wishes that someone has. And people are loyal to their jobs, they're loyal to their power structures. And
well,
sad
you're
but
right.
True,
Yeah, I mean, if you get paid 10 times for doing X
Exactly.
versus 0,
Exactly.
And in fact, in some ways related to my background as a neurosurgeon, I would see second opinions. Half of them would not need, and they've been scheduled for surgery. Mm-hmm. Half of them, at least, would need no surgery whatsoever. And I would tell them that. Of course, the problem is when I tell them that, they don't get the surgery and I don't get paid. But the question is, who are you? And I think that's really a question all of us have to answer for ourselves.
I'm gonna just take everything you just said and integrate it a little bit with what Immanuel said, which is everything you just said. When he's talking about the kids and the teens and how to have a conversation with them about it. The idea of the incentive structure needs to be conveyed transparently as much as possible, so they have some sense of that. Whether that's the social dilemma or the AI dilemma, it's the same type of idea. That's really important, so they understand, when they're getting into something, when it's like an AI app or an AI therapeutic app, that type of understanding, or anything, my AI and Snapchat, which is the one that's out right now, like you said, Randy, and already other ones are coming on WhatsApp already right now. So there's other therapeutic bots going on WhatsApp. So this is already unfolding, and it's going to be unfolding fairly rapidly in the next year. I want to make sure we get to a couple questions. I'm realizing we're at the end of our time, or very close to it. I'm not sure if someone had a question they want to just kind of pose briefly. That's here. But if you do, there might be a way to ask, and we can kind of look at it afterwards as well. I just want to take this time to thank everyone for their presence while someone's maybe doing that. So that Randy posted the latest AI Dilemma talk, which is really important to review and look at as well. Just wanted to really thank you, Jim, and Randy and Milagros and Immanuel for creating this space and time to help inform us and educate us. And we're on the middle of this conversation right now. So we're really about gaining insight and awareness to support us in the best way possible, because what's going to happen probably within this year is you're going to have your Alexa app or your Google app or your Google little speaker or whatever it is, and you're going to say, hey, can you set an appointment for me for tomorrow at 3 o'clock to meet John? And by the way, can I speak with my therapist right now, Susie? And I need to ask her some questions. And Susie's voice will come on, and Dr. Susie, and you'll say, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety right now. And I'm about to go into this appointment. Can you kind of help me through this? And Susie, the AI, who may be an AI from your actual therapist, or maybe just something that's created from one of these therapeutic sites, will support you through that. So, this is all coming, again, fairly rapidly. I don't trust Alexa, someone says so. So we're just gaining awareness, the ethical conversation around it, the awareness conversation is going to be important to have at the dinner table. It's going to be important to bring into your homes within this year, especially of kids and teens or just partnerships, to really kind of keep that awareness alive. And remember, every time you talk to, any AI right now, you're giving it information. So if you want to help train AI to be compassionate, empathic, respectful, you may want to kind of play with saying please and thank you, even to your AI, and kind of, you're letting it know how humans interact. So you're letting it know how to interact. That's the information it's giving it. You're literally training this species every time you engage with it right now. So again, thank you so much to all our panelists today. So important. We'll continue this conversation here or in other places. And to everyone who's tuned in, continue to ask questions, continue to be curious, and may this be something as a force for good in the years to come. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, thank you to the Global Compassion Coalition, obviously, for hosting this whole thing. Can't say that enough. And for creating the space and everything to have this conversation. Thank you to Christine and Alex and everyone over there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.